Hello, folks. I'm Eddie Carson, and you are listening to Race Matters here at WJOPLP, Newburyport Joppa Radio. You can also find this gig on my website at professorcarson.com, the Hub Studio, as well as on SoundCloud and YouTube. So, like we do all the time, we're going to lean into a lot of good funk, a lot of stuff. And folks, we got a special guest who's going to be on the show today, and I'm super excited. We are here with Professor Lisa McLeod, and I'll say a few things about Lisa and what I have from her bio. Then I'm going to invite Lisa into the space here. So Professor McLeod, and she's an academic expert, particularly when it comes to thinking about race and gender, leaning into aspects of critical race gender theory, healthcare and ethics. She holds her PhD in philosophy from Stanford University. And oh, when you think that's a load. And then she also has her JD, her law degree from UCLA. She's made a couple stops. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is that Lisa has published an amazing book here. And Unveiling the Color Line, WEB Dubois on the problem of whiteness. Lisa's a profound academic and has just done some amazing stuff. We're fortunate to have her join us here. Lisa, welcome to Race Matters, my friend. How are we doing this morning?
Oh, thank you so much, Eddie. I'm happy to be here. You're making my day.
And that puts a smile on my face. Before we launch into the book and everything that you've published, recently published, can you tell us a little bit about how did you make your way into your academic field, thinking about things such as critical race theory, thinking about gender theory, and in the assortments of discourse that you were engaged in within your academic practice?
So, I'm not sure people are very transparent to their own selves, but here's the story I can tell you. No disrespect to my poor dear late mother, but she had a lot of kids, and I was raised in the early 70s by television. And
Yeah, okay.
okay. And there was a lot going on in those days. There was a lot, like I was just like a little sponge absorbing a lot of stuff. And, I learned that racism was bad and I became a very good liberal. And then I was lucky enough to go to college at UC Santa Cruz, which was at the time an under attended, pretty lefty place. I mean, there were certainly professors on the other side, but I really learned some critical thinking skills there. And then when I went to college, law school at UCLA, I studied with Kimberly Crenshaw.
Oh, wait, what? We got to pause for a second. You studied, so so
Which is
Professor,
to say, I took a couple classes from her. It's not like we were, we
it
weren't the
doesn't
best.
it doesn't matter. I once I had the dubious honor of attending a conference where she gave a lecture at. I think it was back in it was a DEI conference and
Yeah.
back in 2017 or something like that. Hey, tell us, so what Kimberly Crenshaw, just for folks who don't know about her work and everything, and of course these things that she's coined dealing with legal studies coming out of the late 80s. Tell us a little bit about her and your relationship, and finish with your bio because this is fantastic.
Okay, good. I'm glad that you're liking it, and you can always cut it in post, right? So if it's too much, but she didn't even have tenure yet. She was a pretty young scholar, and she had just written this article about how the legal doctrine around discrimination, around racial discrimination, could not accommodate the experience of Black women in discrimination. And then she wrote about how a lot of the feminist movements, ideas for policies and stuff also were terrible for Black women. Like the one, white women thought it was a huge win when we got this law that said that police who find themselves on the scene of domestic violence, like they have to make an arrest, they have to get the man out of the house. But then it turned out that sometimes, they arrested the woman who was right, and it was very race based, and it was awful. And it really, it really opened my eyes. Like, and she laughed. We were in this senior seminar. She said in that class, she had two of everything. There were like two white women, two black women, two black men. There were two Asian people. Anyway, it was an amazing, amazing experience. And so when I went into, I briefly practiced law. I was in criminal appellate defense, and I was just able to see how many ways racism and white supremacy had absolutely shaped the experience of so many of my clients, so that I couldn't figure out, like, what could they have done differently? What kind of life could they have possibly had? So when I went back to grad school, I knew that I wanted to, like, figure like, I'm gonna figure this thing out.
I love it. I love it, particularly when white folks step up to the mantle and really try to disrupt these systemic patterns that are
Yeah.
problematic in society. So
But it was also hilarious that I'm like, well, once I get done with my dissertation, we're gonna know, and then we'll, all this stuff will be fine. So, but, I mean, I did, like, I had been in some movement spaces, and I knew it was a long road, and I knew I was just one link in a chain. But I also had enough whiteness in me that I was like, when I start writing this, anyhow, that's kind of the story. That's a simplified story of how I got into this work.
Oh, that is fantastic. So now you're engaging, you practice law, you continue in a graduate school, right? Really kind of morph into this academic who's really doing transformational work that is necessary and everything. How does your over time, your mom understand the kind of work that you're doing, and other folks in your family, and how did that resonate with them?
Um, so they were no, I mean, they were kind of, my parents were pretty good Republicans, like in the old sense of that.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely.
And my mom was pro-choice and whatever, and they believed, right? They believed that racism was bad,
Mhm.
but they also believed that people on welfare probably were lazy. It was like that kind of deal.
They were
So
kind of lean into maybe some of that Reagan, um, what the black welfare queen type
welfare
notion.
queens, yes,
Yes.
yes, and who are the truly deserving poor? Remember that conversation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I would say we did not we did not agree about a lot of that stuff. However, uh, and no, like, I mean, I do have a cousin and a sister who have bought my book and are enjoying, like, some of it. But it is not the story of like a big family that understood all this stuff.
Right. Kind of new patterns and everything too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Here in my office, and even in my study at home, I have tons of books related to notions of race, lots of works on WEB Du Bois. And I made my way towards Du Bois actually when I was in high school. I had a friend who bought me my only, I refused to get another copy, my only copy of Souls of Black Folk.
Oh
And I mean,
yeah.
I still have this copy. I don't know. I mean, we're talking back,
Congrats.
going back, yeah, mid '90s,
What
and
a
I
gift.
held on to it. Lots of great essays in that work, but probably one of my favorites, and I think it's the favorite of many folks, is his essay on spiritual strivings.
Yeah.
And I still teach
Yeah.
that in my classes annually. I teach a race, class, and gender course right now, and really, as he kind of defined what does it mean to be Black, and
Yes.
in this world that's taking place. So for you, you've done a lot of great work when it comes to W.E.B. Du Bois. How did you make your way in terms of thinking about Du Bois and his scholarship and the work that this activist professor engaged in during his campaign?
So we talk sometimes, I think with good reason, like a little bit cynically about sort of DEI, inclusion and diversity and stuff. I mean, there's something good there, but a lot of times, it's the bare minimum. And in my little philosophy department in Guilford College, Guilford, in Greensboro, North Carolina,
Which,
we
by the way, has a long history of thinking about race and segregation and all those things, thinking about racism.
Yeah, it's a Quaker school. They were slow to, as Southern schools were, they were slow to integrate, but they've done some great work. And so our department had a requirement that every major take some course where they dove deep into a single philosopher. And big surprise, like they were white men mostly, almost, I think all at the time that we were teaching back in the early aughts. And so I was like, well, so my first one was on William James
Mm-hmm.
because I had read some of his stuff, no expert by any means. But then I'm like, well, I know that Du Bois studied with William James, and I know he was an undergraduate major in philosophy. So I bet if I read his, more of his stuff, I'll figure out that there is like a philosophical angle. And that was so true. So I taught a philosophical course on Du Bois several times during my career there. And we read Souls, we read Darkwater, we read Dusk of Dawn. Those were my primary pieces at the time. And, discovered so many themes on education, on gender, on war, right? As you know, on the economy. So that was really it. It was like my attempt to sort of diversify the offerings in our department. I discovered, I mean, I had read a little bit of Du Bois, but I had been very misled sort of about the range of his,
Well, let me guess, right? I mean, for a period of time, like many folks, you're limited to, like a lot of us at a period of time, to him and Booker T. Washington
right?
and some of these other like genteel aspects until you have to expand the scope of this narrow canon defined by white people.
Absolutely right. This Poindexter guy who's just like, wow, actually, yeah. And so, and at the time, there were people trying to say like, well, Booker T. Washington made some really good, whatever. So it was that discussion. And so just the first time I read The Souls of White Folks,
Yes, yes.
I just yeah, the courage, right? That essay took. Yeah.
It's it's interesting too because I remember a number of years ago, um, I was working on a journal paper dealing with Du Bois, and someone asked, but what is there really to write about him? I mean, it's the whole this little small narrow lens by which folks defined him, knowing that this human being was alive for 95 years and as I have projects coming out, a complicated human being. I
Yes.
mean, and there have even times where I've in my work labeled him a bit Victorian.
Right.
I've told folks who know that I read his stuff, I like studying him. I don't know if I'm not sure if WEB and I would get along today. I mean,
I
I,
think
I don't think he would even like me. Okay, and part of it because I like jazz music and I know how he feels about jazz music. That's
but
problematic.
you got to ask yourself, which Du Bois are you talking about?
Now, see, we get to the complicated part. That's fair.
Yeah. Like, okay, so 1903 Du Bois doesn't like you.
No,
And maybe 1920 Du Bois is like, oh, that guy. I like some of his ideas. But by 1940, I mean, I don't know if he ever came around to jazz, but
yeah, I don't think he quite did. But your point is really good because the story that I always think about quite a bit is his encounter with what was it with John Hope Frazier? and where he goes up to the Boyce and
Yeah.
says, "You're whatchamacallit?" And then the Boyce turns to him, and this was a younger the Boyce, like super young, and says, "But who are you?" and dismisses him. And then later on, right, that conversation would be different, but he really transformed himself, particularly after the publication of Black Reconstruction, as we know,
Yeah.
and became a little
Yeah.
bit more radical in his own proclivities moving forward.
No. And then running for office on the socialist ticket
Yes.
in his elderly years, like I'm sure he was still, he wore his three-piece suit and stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
But you know what? I'm not going to point out. I,
bow tie guy.
I love my bow ties. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna.
I thought about wearing a tie for this very thing.
I would have been all over that.
Next time, man. Next
Next time,
time,
absolutely.
20 years from now, when I've written another book.
But Professor, let's I want to talk about your book for a little bit here.
Yeah.
And folks, when you get a chance here, it is outstanding. You know, when we sit here and we think about unveiling a color line, and notice, I love the fact that you know W.B. Du Bois on the problem of whiteness. And it's interesting too, because this is something that he's been talking about, you know, for a long period of time in the way you captured here. If I can, I just want to, can I share one piece here?
Please.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I want, you know, I love your thoughts. You know, here in your overview of the book, you start off by saying that the opening chapters engage with the first 10 years or so of Du Bois's public career. And you go on to say that in doing so, the conversation of races delivered in the first meeting of the American Negro Academy, which offers a vision of global racial differences that insist on human equality and the duty of white Americans to work against racism. And I love that, the duty of white Americans start off here, but yet throughout the book, right, there's this kind of evolutionary pattern in terms of this critique, because I want to jump to, where was it at? I bookmarked it here.
Take your time.
I know, I tell you what, it is
The less I have to talk, the better I feel.
no. So then, because so then later on in the work, on page 43, you know, you have a section on the pessimism of souls and its ambition. That was unbelievably informative. You know, the only fictional piece in the Souls of Black Folks of the coming of John portrays a lynching as the inevitable result of the collusion of human dignity with the white supremacist patriarchy. That's there. And there's this sense, this religious imagery and all of that happening. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That's just fantastic.
That moment.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, let me have a look for a second. Yeah. So, each one of the books that I deal with in this book, contains multitudes, obviously. And so it wasn't always clear, like, what should I talk about, right? But I wanted to talk about this story, The Coming of John, because of Brian Stevenson wrote his book Just Mercy, and
Yes.
so I quoted in here, he was thinking about this scene when he had been talking to the family of one of his clients, and it was, it made me reread that story with an eye to thinking about John's family. So John, in the story, John is he's a bright kid. He goes away to get educated. He gets educated in more ways than one, because he runs straight into this kind of terrible white supremacy in New York. And then he comes back home and he tries to start a school, and he's able to do that because the white townsfolk are like, oh, sure, you can teach kids the ABCs and whatever, that'll be helpful to us. But then when he one day is teaching the kids that they are just as good, they are good human beings, right? That is, they are beautiful, they deserve all good things. And was it the judge who had hired him, like heard him saying that stuff to the kids, and he was like, you can't be right? And so that led to his, and when I thought about his family, just like how much they had invested in him and how much they believed, like, this kid is gonna make it, and um to have to deal with him coming back and doing his best to lead the community, and then what happened to him, it was, it's just so profound, and to see that it was unlike the usual narrative of whiteness, that here, that people who were lynched were criminals, or I mean, we all know that that's a lie since Ida B. Wells, but the kinds that still, I mean, this is still going on, the kinds of behaviors that whiteness decides are deserving of death for people of color. Yeah. So that's the pessimism, right? Because John is someone who did everything right. There are so many people who did everything right, who do everything right, and the white world does not allow space for that.
Just to pull in just mercy into that, which is really quite brilliant when you think about it, in terms of Brian's. I mean, that, I read that book and I taught it. It was on my syllabus for a few years. And it's I mean, it's an emotional book.
Truly.
I mean, just,
It's
the
devastating.
idea of, as Brian is trying to kind of capture our emotions. I'll never forget the scene where in his work where he is constantly visiting the jail cell and he sees the car with all the Confederate flags and the way they treated him. He had to
The guards,
the guards,
who
and
they
then
are.
and spoiler alert, folks, if you hadn't read it, you need to read it. But I'm just going to go ahead and say this now. To a point where he starts taking this young man who's incarcerated, this young white man who's incarcerated. I think it was ice cream, I believe, and his guard just observed that over a period of time, and the way he just escalated his narrative of white supremacy really kind of draws some nice elements
Yeah.
here. But and I say that, and that is, I'm not, I'm not a pessimist, and I'm not an optimist. I am hopeful. I'll say that much too. But yet, when we think about your scholarship and his work and the message that Du Bois is trying to send us, that you are doing a great job as a prophet of his work, if I can use that language, right? Whose ears do we want this to fall on, particularly in an age where we're seeing the problems of whiteness, the problem of patriarchy, the problems, again, patriarchy, male supremacy, that are here as we engage into a political campaign that's taking place in an election year? Who do you want hearing this?
Yeah. So when I first started writing it, I I definitely felt like I was writing it to, so I did some sort of DEI work in my other school, helped train what we, trainings, um and there were an awful lot of white people who wanted to be good. I mean, that's how, like, especially white women, we're brought up to be good, and we want to be good. And too many times we would have Black students come in and sort of testify, like, this is my experience of the world. And then white people would be like, oh, that is so terrible. And they would be so sad. And then some of them would be like, that's so sad that's what they think, because it's not true. And I'm like, oh, wait. Okay. step back, right? We don't know what's true. You don't know what's true. Like, you will have your experience. That doesn't make it a true experience. So I knew that there was some good, I mean, as a white person, I know that there's some goodwill among some white people, but that our way of being brought up in the world makes us quite bad learners about the experience of people of color. And it makes us, and I all glory to Charles Mills, who was a Black philosopher who died a few years ago.
Yes. He was
Who
the legal scholar at Harvard, right?
No, Charles was a philosopher at he ended his career at CUNY grad
Okay.
center. So he wrote a book called The Racial Contract,
Okay.
about how sort of our version of the social contract has left out of it the whole thing about how white people also agreed that people of color were subhuman. And that is how we are able to believe in human rights and also, exploit and murder. And it's a brilliant book, The Racial Contract. He also began developing this notion of white ignorance, that white people are specifically ignorant as to what the world is as a result of white supremacy. And I thought that I could discern in Charles's work, but also so much in Du Bois's work, that the reason white people tend to be ignorant this way is because we want to maintain our self-image of being good. And so we can't believe that we are this terrible. We can't believe we are this ignorant. And so it's almost, it's almost a psychological complex, except it's much more social than that. It's much more historical than that. That evidence, both evidence of Black excellence in humanity and Indigenous excellence in human, like all of that evidence of people of color being fully human, we aren't going to take it in right. And then their testimony about how it is to live in the world that whiteness has made will absolutely be downplayed. We might give it the credit, like, okay, that's their experience, but it's not true, right? I'm not a bad person. My family aren't bad people, because that's all we can hear, is that you are bad when you're a bad person. And that's irrelevant to me, like whether it makes us good or bad people. What's relevant to me is that it causes harm. It
Yes.
causes terrible harm, right? Our habits, our experience, our inability to understand stuff has caused terrible harm. And that's the least of it, right? That we're just, oh, we don't understand, so we cause harm. But it's serious. It's quite serious. So
Do you think white folks have weaponized terms like white guilt? For
yeah.
example, they want to put it back on people like me, and I say I don't want white people to feel guilty. I want white people just do something. Don't feel guilty. There's no reason to do that. But there's this sense that like a lot of things, they've weaponized not only just my skin and my body. They've weaponized language like DEI, for example, woke, for example.
Whoa, oh, the worst.
Yeah, and they weaponize white fragility. Thinking about Robin DiAngelo, they
Yep.
weaponize, the elements that you're talking about, such as white privilege.
Yes. And there were definitely students and grown-ups that I've run into who it feels like, I don't know, it feels and I try to be careful at putting it this way, because we're not babies, we're not toddlers,
Right.
But, it's like a toddler who doesn't want it to be bedtime. So they're just like, no, it's not bedtime. It's not. And sorry, kid, look at the clock. It is bedtime, right? And so it's because we feel like we're the ones who define the world. How dare you try to wake me? Like it's like it is hilarious and you have to laugh, right? But it's awful that white people refuse to believe the truth.
It's, and I found myself over a period of time, particularly working in predominantly white spaces, where I have this intellectual capacity to want to engage in certain levels of discourse, but yet having to be cautious about those spaces that are there. Not some tenured person who can preach the gospel of truth from the ivy tower for a long period of time. I'm a working class brother who has to pay the bills and everything too. And that's what
Yeah.
it boils down to that. You
Yep.
know, will you be teaching your book in your class this year?
Um, so I have a class where we are gonna read some Du Bois, and then we're gonna read a little bit of my book. I'm not speaking of being not tenured. I don't have all, I mean, to be like, the Northeastern Department in Philosophy and Religious Studies has been awesome to me, for me. And they've given me a lot of autonomy in my courses. But the courses they're courses that were already existing, and so they're encouraging me. The chair is wonderful. She's encouraging me to use some of my work in my classes. So yes, I mean, I could just say, sure, some of it is happening.
I mean, it's what happens, right? You have great scholars who are, leading dynamic classes and introducing things to folks that they hadn't really thought about so much and everything too. We think about your scholarship and your work in really how you're using this work in your class. What any future projects taking place? I know, much like myself, you also finished a book chapter for Alden Morris on
Right.
the WEB Du Bois handbook.
Yep.
That's there. Any conferences, panels? What's
What
the forecast looking like for you? Although, I mean, I'm sure you're also taking some victory laps and just celebrating with a little champagne, having this release.
Seriously, yeah, because this has been a really long project, and the pandemic and changing jobs, like it was a lot. And so I'm trying to feel it, right? That this is a real thing. Um, and so there's a couple of things in the works. So one is that Du Bois left behind, as you know, there's some unpublished stuff in the archives. And one of them is this, as I wrote about in one of the pieces you got to edit. It's an epistolary novel about democracy and socialism. And it is very fun. And it's not quite finished. Like, he never had a chance to edit and really polish it, but it just contains some amazing stuff. And so I would really like, in some shape or fashion, to be able to get that out into the world, whatever has to happen for that. I'm also trying to do some of the work that Du Bois did in every one of his collections of what, as you were saying, like in the Strivings essay, like this is how it is, right? This is how it is to be Black. um it's a challenge to think about all of the sort of theoretical work that Black people have done around what whiteness does, to try to articulate what that means from white racial identity. And it's a challenge for a couple reasons. One is just hard. and
Yes.
I don't want to do it. And it's also hard because you don't want to like make whiteness like the sense. You don't want to like spend too much time like, oh, white people, right? Like everything is about white people, but you want this to be about stuff that white people don't normally think about and express.
I mean,
Um,
and you're absolutely right. I asked in my race class in gender course, a couple days ago, I sat there and I asked students, right? And I told them this. I said, I think about my racial identity every day, every second of every hour, every year. It is there. And I can't escape it. And even if I forget about it for a second, I walk into a space, then I'm automatically reminded, and no one has to say anything. That is the dawn. That's what it looks like as we engage in this kind of stuff. So I love what you're thinking about and the way you're engaging in that, particularly because, and again, I just want to give you a shout out here that we're in a world where we need great white ambassadors to serve as missionaries for the problems of the color line. And those problems extend well in, right? Thinking about Du Bois into the 21st century, because, we're headed towards a political election. And I talked to my mom and folks, and it's like we're taking steps backwards, trying to
yeah.
disenfranchise, take the franchise away from people, make it difficult. I'm not convinced of that progress. And that leads me to this question I want to ask you. Would you say your book is a piece of hope, optimism, or pessimism?
Uh, wow. Uh, I think it's, I don't, so I don't pretend to know what the future is going to look like.
You're not prophetic? Oh, come on, my friend.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I try to have a little like it's just too hot, So here's this horrible moment with that guy, that 45 guy, right? Whose name shall not be mentioned. He is such a symbol of whiteness holding on. Like we were, like white people were like, oh, okay, well, we'll change things this much, but we still got to be in control. We're still going to be in control. We're still going to be telling the stories, but we'll change things this much. And so I think I wrote it somewhere in here. You can't tell really if this is sort of like whiteness is not going to go down easy,
Hmm.
right? If it's going down. And again, I don't know I don't know. I am a little bit prophetic because here's a secret for white people to learn. We are not the majority of people in the world,
No.
right? We are not. We don't, we,
And look, and by 2041, in this country, in the United States, that's going to change.
I know. And unfortunately, we also have the historical example of South Africa to know that being in the minority is not always enough to make us sit down and shut up.
That's true. That's fair.
But eventually we will have to sit down and shut up or it's going to be worse. So it is the book, whether it's optimistic or pessimistic, it is an attempt to move us further down the river toward white people are just some people. We're just some people, and we have to recognize what people like us have been responsible for, and we have to recognize how to be different, how to be differently. So that's my hope, right?
No,
uh
that is beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. No.
I mean, you know, I I'm as ignorant as anyone, but every now and then you're like, okay, these my white people, if we're messing up. We are messing up on a grand scale.
So as we're getting kind of close to the end of time and everything, I do want to ask you this question here. So again, thinking about the title of your book, Unveiling the Color Line, W.E.B. Du Bois, on the problem of whiteness, some people, they'll look at this title and they'll look at the larger landscape of things, thinking about the work that you've done, the work that you've done dealing with DEIB, thinking about justice work and all of that stuff. And they will contend that, it's people like me, people like you, titles like this, for example, that perpetuate this notion that race is the issue. And if we just stop talking about this stuff, things will be better. Racism will disappear and we'll engage in other real life problems because race isn't a problem whatsoever. I know you've heard that before. And how do you respond to something like that?
Um, so I think that perspective ignores two things, two big things. One is a ton of statistical data. There's a ton of statistical data. Um, and statisticians have figured out how to do this thing called multiple regression analysis.
Mhm.
I'm not a statistician, but I know you can control for other variables when you do your analysis and show that racial identity has real impact in the world. We see it in the medical field, we see it all across, financials, employment, education, everything, every element of human life in this country that affects what kind of life you're going to have is affected by race. And it's gotten so bad that there's medical scholars who say that just living in this racist soup, right, creates enough stress to cause all kinds of fatal illnesses in people of color. Like, I love some individuals who are people of color, and it is not okay that their lives are shortened.
Yeah.
Right? It is not okay. So that's a huge thing to ignore, is just data. The other evidence we're ignoring are all of these books that you're talking about, that exist of people of color testifying to their own experience, right? And if white people would just stop reading other white people and start reading the brilliant work by people of color in this country across the decades that shows exactly how race is a problem. It's not the only problem. It's not unaffected by other vectors of human experience, but it is undeniably a problem. And when you look at the current, you look at the current like political discourse around immigrants, like, well, which immigrants are you having a problem with? Which refugees are you having a problem with? Right? So, like, if France or England like got flooded, we would be welcoming them in their
And
stone,
that's right. That's a little
right?
different there. But we're not building a wall between us and Canada.
For instance.
So
Yeah. So that's what I mean, if they would sit around and listen, that's what I would say.
my friend, we are about out of time here. And folks, thank you for joining in and listening to Race Matters here at WJOPLP Newburyport. I'm here with Professor Lisa McLeod, and we spent a lot of time talking about a number of things, particularly her own scholarship and her recently published book, Unveiling of the Color Line, W.E.B. Du Bois on the Problem of Whiteness. I highly encourage you to grab it, read it, challenge yourself, really look at the profoundness of that late brother and the brilliant scholarship of my friend who's here and everything too. Professor, thank you. This was wonderful. I appreciate
Thank you so much, my friend. I really, really appreciate it. You are awesome.
it. You better be careful now, and inflate that ego, but I like
No,
that.
sir, you deserve every word.